the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. Hope is a commodity more expensive than water, and on Hive World Morgulus Tertius both had run dry centuries ago. Enforcer Karis adjusted the rebreather mask clamped over his jaw, the rubber chafing against skin that hadn't seen natural sunlight in 40 years. The air in sub-level 72 tasted of recycled sweat ozone and the copper tang of old blood. It was the smell of humanity surviving efficiently, if not happily. Karis was a good man, or as good as the Imperium allowed him to be. He didn't take bribes from the corpse starch guilds, he didn't beat citizens unless they were rioting, and he said his prayers to the God Emperor every shift change. His belief was simple, a concrete block in his chest. The universe is a nightmare, and only obedience keeps the monsters out. He stood on a gantry, overlooking the rust-colored sprawl of the hab blocks, his laser gun resting heavy in his arms. Beside him, Trooper Vance was shaking out a cramp in his leg, and the armor rattling. Quiet night, Sarge Vance muttered the voxcaster in his helmet, turning his voice into a tinny scratch. Too quiet. Usually the rust jackals are screaming for blood by now. Don't jinx it, Vance. Karis grunted, scanning the shadows. The Emperor protects, but he doesn't safeguard against idiocy. That was the moment the sky tore open. It wasn't the scream of a siren or the roar of a generator failure. It was a sound that shouldn't exist, the sound of reality itself, shrieking as it was vivisected. Karis looked up, expecting the jagged purple tear of a warp rift, the kind the preachers warned about, full of tentacles and madness. But this was different. It was a clean, surgical incision in the fabric of the air, high above the hab stacks. It bled crimson light, not the sickly violet of chaos. And from that bleeding wound, something fell. It plummeted like a discarded stone, a streak of red darkness that smashed into the plaza of St. Drusus 3 levels down. The impact shook the gantry, rattling Karis's teeth. Steam hissed from the pipes lining the walls, but then, impossibly, the steam turned to snow. Temperature alert? Vance stammered, tapping his wrist display. Sarge, it's dropping. It's freezing. Frost raced across the rusted metal railings, a spiderweb of white ice spreading outward from the impact zone below. The oppressive heat of the underhive vanished, replaced by a graveyard chill that bit through Karis's flak armor. Squad Karis barked his training, overriding the sudden primal fear in his gut. Move out Sector 4 impact site. Weapons hot. Let's see what the hell just fell on our city. What happens when a monster from a universe of controlled supernatural laws lands in a galaxy of infinite chaotic war? What happens when Alucard, the no-life king, wakes up in the Warhammer 40,000 universe? By the time Karis and his squad of 6 reached the crater, the silence had returned heavier than before. The usual cacophony of the underhive, the distant gunfire, the machinery, the screaming had been smothered. The crater was deep punched through 3 layers of ferrocrete. In the center, shadows were moving. Not the natural shadows cast by the flickering lumen strips, but thick, oily darkness that seemed to possess a liquid intelligence. And standing in the middle of it was a man. He was tall, impossibly so, draped in a duster coat the color of fresh, arterial blood. He wore a wide-brimmed hat and orange-tinted glasses that caught the industrial gloom. He was dusting himself off casually, as if he'd just tripped on a curb rather than fallen from the sky. Well, the figure said. His voice was rich baritone and utterly bored. It echoed strangely, bouncing off the metal walls with too much resonance. This is new. Karis signaled his squad to spread out, taking cover behind debris and pillars. He raised his amplified hailer. Unidentified Citizen Karas shouted, his voice booming. You are in violation of curfew and unauthorized atmospheric entry. Identify yourself and kneel. The figure in red didn't kneel. He looked up, adjusting his glasses. He took a deep breath, tasting the toxic air. Toxic, the man mused, ignoring the 6 laser guns pointed at his chest. Recycled, desperate, and blood. So much blood. It's almost disappointing. Fire warning shot, Karras ordered. Vance squeezed the trigger. A last bolt cracked through the air, scorching the ground inches from the stranger's boot. The man didn't flinch. He just looked at the scorch mark, then up at Karras. He smiled. It was a smile that had too many teeth. A shark's grin on a human face. "You know," the man said, starting to walk toward them, his step silent. "I've been called many things. Monster, devil, the Grim Reaper, but citizen. That's a new one. I rather like it." Before Karras could issue the kill order, movement erupted from the alleyways to the left. The Rust Jackals, a local gang of gene-bulked stimheads and heavy weapon servitors. They had been watching, waiting to scavenge whatever had fallen from the sky. "Get back, imp scum," the gang leader roared, a brute with a rusted circular saw replaced for a hand. "The skyfall belongs to us." The gang, 20 strong, opened fire. Not at Karras, but at the man in red. Solid slug rounds, stubber fire, and crude explosives rained down on the stranger. Karras watched frozen as the stranger was torn apart. The heavy caliber rounds shredded the red coat, punching fist-sized holes through the man's chest, his throat, his face. The stranger's head snapped back, his glasses flying off his body, jerking like a marionette with cut strings. He collapsed into a heap of bloody rags. The gang leader laughed, revving his saw hand. Easy picking stripped the corpse. Karras felt a strange sickness in his stomach. It wasn't pity. It was the wrongness of it. The body on the ground wasn't cooling. The blood pooling beneath it wasn't spreading. It was flowing backward. "Wait," Karras whispered. The heap of red rags began to twitch. The laughter of the gang died out instantly. The blood that had sprayed across the ferrocrete reversed its course, slithering back into the body like red snakes. The holes in the coat stitched themselves shut. The shattered jawbone snapped back into place with a wet crunch that echoed louder than the gunfire had. The man stood up. He picked up his glasses from the rubble and slid them back onto his face. The orange lenses hid his eyes, but Karras could feel them burning. "My turn," the vampire said. He moved. It wasn't speed. It was a glitch in reality. One moment he was standing 10 meters away, the next he was in the center of the gang. He held 2 massive handguns, one silver, one black, that looked like they belonged on a tank, not in a human hand. Boom. The silver gun, the sheer size of a cannon, fired. The round hit the gang leader in the chest. It didn't just kill him, it erased his torso. Red mist painted the 3 gangers standing behind him. Pandemonium erupted. The gang fired blindly, screaming, but the man in red was a phantom. He walked through the hail of bullets, firing with lazy precision. Every shot was a kill. Heads popped like overripe fruit. Limbs were severed by high explosive rounds. He wasn't fighting. He was cleaning. 37. 38. The vampire counted aloud between shots, his tone conversational. "Is this the best you have? I was promised a universe of war." Karras watched a ganger charge with a vibro knife. The vampire didn't even look. He caught the ganger's wrist, twisted it until the bone snapped through the skin, and then, in a motion too fluid to be human, bit the man's throat out. He drank. Amidst the gunfire and the screaming, he paused to swallow, a look of genuine ecstasy crossing his face. "Disgusting," the vampire muttered, wiping his mouth and dropping the corpse. Chem-tainted, bitter. You people eat terribly. In 30 seconds, the rust jackals were gone. 20 men reduced to wet smears on the pavement. The stranger stood alone in the carnage, the steam rising from his coat. He turned slowly to face Karras and his squad. Karras's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct he had, every hour of training, every sermon he'd ever heard, screamed one word: demon. Squad Karras's voice wavered, then hardened. Target the entity. Maximum power. For the Emperor. The Emperor? The vampire asked, tilting his head. Does he have good blood? Fire. 6 laser guns unleashed a wall of coherent light. The beam struck the vampire square in the chest, burning through the red duster, searing flesh. The vampire staggered back, smoke rising from the cauterized wounds. He looked down at the smoldering hole in his sternum, then back up at Karras. The flesh began to knit together, pink muscles spinning into place, skin sealing over it. Lasers, the vampire chuckled, the sound low and dark. Flashlights, how quaint. He raised the black gun, the jackal. The muzzle aperture looked like a tunnel into the abyss. Sarge Vance whimpered. He's not dying. Why isn't he dying? Check your fear, Trooper Karras shouted, though his own hands were slick with sweat. He grabbed a crack grenade from his belt. He bleeds, we can kill him. Karras hurled the grenade. It was a perfect throw, landing right at the vampire's feet. Crump. The explosion blew out the nearby windows and kicked up a cloud of dust and pulverized concrete. Karras held his breath, waiting for the smoke to clear, praying to see a broken body. The dust settled. The vampire was gone. Where is... Right here, a voice whispered directly into Karras's ear. Karras spun around, but a hand cold as the void, strong as a hydraulic press, wrapped around his throat and lifted him off the ground. Karras clawed at the white-gloved hand, his boots kicking at empty air. The vampire held him close, face to face. Up close, the eyes behind the orange glasses weren't human. They were vertical slits of crimson magma swirling with a madness that felt ancient. You have discipline, the vampire noted, observing Karras struggling. Fear, yes. But you threw the grenade. You held your line. I like that. Demon. Karras choked out spitting blood onto the vampire's pristine cravat. The Emperor protects. Does he? The vampire's smile widened, stretching the skin of his face. Because from where I'm standing, I'm the one doing the protecting. And the killing. Mostly the killing. He loosened his grip slightly, allowing Karras to breathe. Tell me, little soldier, Alucard whispered, looking past Karras at the flickering lights of the upper hive. Where can I find the real monsters in this city? The ones that provide a challenge, because these... He gestured with his free hand at the slaughtered gang, were an appetizer. And I'm still hungry. Before Karras could answer, a thunderous sound echoed from the corridor behind them. Heavy, rhythmic footsteps. The thud, thud, thud of armored giants. Karras's eyes widened. He knew that sound. It was the sound of salvation. It was the sound of the angels of death. Thank the throne. Karras gasped. The Astartes. Alucard dropped Karras, letting the enforcer crumple to the deck. The vampire turned toward the sound, sensing the power approaching. Astartes. Alucard tasted the word. Now that sounds promising. From the shadows of the transit tunnel, 3 figures emerged. They were massive, 7 feet tall, encased in power armor of dark green. The symbol of a winged sword was emblazoned on their pauldrons. Dark angels. Their bolters' weapons, designed to blow tanks apart, were raised and locked onto Alucard. Xenos entity. The lead space marine boomed, his voice amplified to a level that vibrated in Karras's bones. You have defiled Imperial soil. Submit to purification." Alucard spread his arms wide, the castle and jackal dangling from his fingers. The shadows around him began to writhe, forming eyes and mouths that grinned in the dark. Purification. Alucard laughed, and the sound was like a church bell tolling for a funeral. I was about to ask for the same thing. He looked back at Karis, who was scrambling backward, clutching his laser gun. "Watch closely, human." The vampire said, his eyes flaring with red light. "Class is in session." Brother Sergeant Azrael of the Dark Angels did not believe in hesitation. Hesitation was the seed of heresy, the crack in the armor where doubt festered. He looked at the creature in the red coat, a humanoid entity standing amidst the butchered remains of 20 gangers, and his tactical display painted a single flashing rune over the target extremis. Squad Azrael's voice was a grindstone over the vox. Pattern Epsilon. Controlled bursts. Purge. Karis, pressing himself into the dirt behind a ferrocrete pillar, covered his ears. He had heard tales of the Astartes' weapons. They called them bolters, but that was a polite word for a handheld rocket launcher. The corridor exploded. It wasn't the crack-crack of laser guns or the rattle of stubbers. It was a thunderous, percussive thump-thump-thump that hit the chest like a physical blow. 3 Space Marines opened fire simultaneously. The mass-reactive shell's distinct 75 caliber missiles screamed across the plaza. They struck Alucard with the force of a falling building. Karis watched horrified and mesmerized as the vampire was obliterated. The first round caught Alucard in the shoulder, detonating inside the flesh. The arm coat and all vanished in a spray of red mist. The second round took him in the gut, blowing him in half. The third, fourth, and fifth turned his torso into a hollowed-out ruin of charred meat and exposed bone. The vampire didn't even try to dodge. He stood there taking the wrath of the Imperium, letting it tear him apart. His head snapped back as a round grazed his skull, taking off his hat and half his face. He fell. It was a wet, heavy sound, a heap of meat and red fabric smoking on the cold ground. "Cease fire," Azrael commanded. The thunder stopped. The ringing in Karis's ears was a high-pitched scream. Karis peeked around the pillar. Smoke drifted from the barrel of Azrael's bolter. The Space Marines advanced their boots, crushing the rubble, moving to confirm the kill. They were magnificent and terrifying living statues of war. "Target neutralized," one of the Battle Brothers stated, his voice flat, scanning for warp residue. Karis let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. The Emperor protects, he thought. Of course he protects. Nothing survives a bolter volley. Then the heap of meat laughed. It was a wet, gurgling sound, at first bubbling up through a throat that shouldn't exist. Then it cleared, becoming rich and dark and amused. "Is that it?" the voice asked from the floor. The Dark Angels stopped instantly, weapons snapping back to target. The blood on the ground began to move. Karis gagged as he watched the red pools hiss and boil, turning into shadow, then into liquid, then flowing upward. The shredded meat on the floor knit itself together with a sound like tearing canvas played in reverse. Bone snapped into place. Muscle wove itself over the skeleton. Skin pale and flawless sealed the horror shut. Alucard stood up. He reached out a hand, and his hat, which had been blown 10 meters away, dissolved into shadow and reformed in his grip. He placed it back on his head. His glasses reformed on his nose, hiding eyes that Karis knew were glowing. That Alucard said, brushing a speck of dust from a chest that had been a crater 3 seconds ago, actually hurt a little. Azrael didn't panic. Astartes did not panic. But Karis saw the sergeant's grip tighten on his bolter. Resilient Azrael noted, "Brother Ezekiel, bring the heavy flamer. We burn it to ash." "Oh, I don't think so," Alucard grinned. You had your turn. He raised the jackal and the casel. My turn. Boom. The sound of Alucard's guns made the bolters seem polite. The jackal roared, spitting a 13mm explosive round encased in blessed Macedonian silver. It struck the battle brother, on the left brother Ezekiel. The round didn't bounce off the ceramite power armor. It didn't fizzle against the plasteel. It punched through the breastplate like a nail through paper. There was a muffled detonation inside the Space Marine's chest cavity. Brother Ezekiel jerked his backplate, blowing out in a shower of sparks and gore. The giant crumpled his heavy flamer, clattering uselessly to the ground. Kara stared, his mind unable to process the image. And Astartes, an angel of death, had just died. 1 shot, 1 second. The immutability of the Imperium shattered in Karas's mind right there. Heresy, the third Marine shouted, charging forward. He didn't fire. He drew a chainsword, the monomolecular teeth screaming as they revved to 10,000 RPM. Like abomination, the Space Marine covered the distance in a blur of transhuman speed. He swung the blade in a downward arc, meant to cleave Alucard from crown to crotch. Alucard didn't shoot. He stepped in. He caught the chainsword. He didn't block it with a weapon. He caught the blade with his bare hand. The teeth bit into his white glove, chewing into his palm, spraying blood. Alucard didn't flinch. He looked the 7-foot super soldier in the eye, his face inches from the snarling helmet grill. Brave Alucard whispered the word cutting through the roar of the saw. But foolish. Alucard twisted his wrist. Snap. The chainsword forged from tempered adamantium shattered. The metal shards pinged off the Marine's helmet. Before the Astartes could react, Alucard's other hand shot out, grabbing the Marine's faceplate. Sit down. Alucard slammed the Marine into the ground. It wasn't a throw, it was a meteorite impact. The Ferrocrete cratered. The Marine's helmet cracked open, revealing a stunned, bloodied face beneath. Alucard raised the casole to the prone Marine's forehead. Wait, the command didn't come from Azrael. It came from the shadows behind the squad. It was a voice of absolute terrifying authority. A voice that expected obedience from gods and monsters alike. Alucard paused, his finger resting on the trigger. He tilted his head, looking past the remaining Space Marine sergeant. "And who might you be?" Alucard asked, genuinely curious. A woman stepped into the light. She was terrifying in a way the Space Marines weren't. The Marines were weapons of war. She was the hand that wielded them. She wore a long coat of black leather, reinforced with carapace armor, trimmed with crimson velvet. A golden rosette, the symbol of the Inquisition, hung from her neck. Her face was a roadmap of scars and hard choices, framed by severe gray hair. Her left eye was a bionic implant, a glowing red lens that whirred as it focused on the vampire. Her right arm was entirely mechanical, a skeletal construct of brass and pistons holding a plasma pistol that hummed with the heat of a contained sun. Behind her, Karis saw more soldiers emerging, stormtroopers with hotshot laser guns, their faces hidden behind masks. "I am Inquisitor Katina Valdez of the Ordo Xenos," she said, stepping over the corpse of the ganger Alucard had drained. She didn't look at the dead bodies. She looked only at the monster. "And you are destroying my property." "Your property," Alucard gestured with the gun barrel at the Space Marine beneath his boot. "This big green toy. He tried to saw me in half. I think I'm entitled to break him." "Release him," Valdez commanded. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Or I will authorize the orbit to strip this entire Hive sector down to bedrock. You might survive it, vampire, but your amusement will be over." Alucard stared at her. For a long moment, the only sound was the whirring of the surviving Marine's armor servos and Karis's ragged breathing. Then Alucard laughed. He stepped back, holstering his massive guns with a flourish. Orbit, Alucard mused. You'd kill millions to scratch me. I like your style, Inquisitor. The prone Space Marine scrambled up, backing away to stand beside Sergeant Azrael. Both warriors kept their weapons trained on Alucard, but they waited for Valdez's signal. Valdez walked closer, her bionic eye scanning Alucard up and down. Identify, she said. Species designation, origin, purpose. I told the boy over there. Alucard nodded toward Karis, who flinched at being noticed. I'm a vampire. Origin somewhere far away. Purpose. I was hoping for a walk, maybe a midnight snack. But you people are very rude hosts. Vampire Valdez repeated, testing the word. The term is archaic. It usually refers to warp-tainted mutants or specific Xenos subbreeds. You are neither. Oh, Alucard raised an eyebrow behind his glasses. And how would you know? Because Valdez said, pointing her mechanical hand at him, you are standing on a localized nexus of warp energy, yet my auspex reads 0 corruption on you. You absorb damage like a demon, but you bleed like a biological entity. You are an impossibility. Impossibility is my specialty, Alucard said. So, Inquisitor, are we going to talk, or are you going to throw more of your metal men at me? That depends, Valdez said, her finger hovering over the trigger of her plasma pistol, on whether you can be useful. Karis watched the exchange, his mind reeling. The Inquisitor was negotiating with the thing that had just snapped an Astartes chainsword like a twig. This was heresy. This was madness. Useful Alucard's smile turned predatory. I'm not a tool, woman. I'm a calamity. The Imperium has use for calamities, Valdez countered smoothly. Provided they are aimed in the right direction. And what direction would that be? At the things we cannot kill. Before Alucard could respond, the air pressure in the plaza dropped. The frost that had accompanied Alucard's arrival returned, but this time it felt different. It felt wrong, greasy. Karis felt the hairs on his arms stand up. A taste of copper filled his mouth. The shadows in the corners of the plaza began to lengthen, stretching toward the center, not like light dictates, but like starving fingers. Warp spike, Azrael roared, checking his auspex. Inquisitor reality breach, detected 12 o'clock. The space between Alucard and Valdez tore open. It wasn't the clean cut of Alucard's arrival. This was a rupture, a jagged wound in the world. The air screamed as purple lightning arced from the tear, shattering the lumen strips. From the rift, a smell of sulfur and burning blood washed over them. Defensive positions, Valdez shouted, her plasma pistol whining as it charged to full power. Alucard didn't move. He stood watching the rift, his hands in his pockets, that same look of bored curiosity on his face. Ah, he whispered, now we're getting somewhere. A hand gripped the edge of the reality tear. It was red-scaled and large enough to crush a human skull. It pulled. With a wet tearing sound, the intruder stepped through. It stood 12 feet tall, towering over even the Space Marines. Its skin was the color of clotted blood, rippling with unnatural muscle. Brass armor was fused directly into its flesh. Its head was elongated, crowned with horns, and its face was a mask of pure, hate-filled geometry. In its hand it carried a black iron axe that dripped fire. A bloodletter, a lesser demon of Khorne. Though there was nothing lesser about it to Karis, the demon roared. It wasn't a sound. It was a physical wave of aggression that forced Karis to his knees, clutching his head. It was the sound of every murder ever committed, screamed at once. Blood for the blood god, The demon bellowed its voice, shaking the foundations of the hive. Skulls for the Skull Throne. The Space Marines opened fire immediately. Bolter rounds exploded against the demon's brass skin, blowing chunks of warped flesh away. But the creature didn't stop. It charged, moving with a flickering speed that defied physics. It swung its axe at Azrael. The sergeant blocked with his bolter, but the demon weapon shore through the gun and the ceramite pauldron beneath, biting deep into the Astartes' shoulder. Azrael grunted, dropping to one knee, drawing his combat knife. Inquisitor Azrael shouted, "Banishment protocols." Valdez fired her plasma pistol. A sun-hot bolt of blue energy struck the demon in the face, burning away half its jaw. It just made the monster angrier. Alucard watched. He watched the Space Marine struggle. He watched the Inquisitor fire. He watched the demon rampage. And then he smiled. A genuine, terrifying smile. Finally, Alucard said, his voice cutting through the chaos, "A playmate." He drew the cassol. He didn't aim at the demon's body. He aimed at the axe. Ping. The bullet struck the flat of the demon's blade, just as it was about to decapitate Azrael, knocking the weapon wide. The demon stumbled, turning its burning yellow eyes toward the vampire. "You," the demon hissed, smoke pouring from its ruined jaw. "You smell wrong. You smell of stolen souls." "And you smell like a wet dog," Alucard replied, stepping forward. The shadows around him flared up, forming the shapes of jagged teeth and hounds. "Tell me, ugly, does your blood taste as bad as you look?" The demon roared and charged Alucard, abandoning the Space Marines. Caras Valdez shouted, grabbing the enforcer by his collar and dragging him behind a pillar. "Stay down, witness this." "Witness what my Lord Caras wept, clutching his laser gun." "The test," Valdez whispered, her bionic eye whirring as it recorded every frame. "We are going to see if the monster eats the demon, or if the demon eats the monster." Alucard holstered the jackal. He kept only the cassol in his right hand. He raised his left hand empty, inviting the charge. "Come on, then." Alucard laughed, his eyes blazing with a crimson light that rivaled the demon's own. "Show me what hell looks like in this universe." The roar of the bloodletter was a physical thing, a concussive wave that rattled the rivets in the bulkheads and turned the blood in Enforcer Caras's veins to ice water. To look at the daemon was to invite madness. Its geometry was hateful, a collection of angles and curves that defied the biological laws of the material universe. It was a riot of brass and crimson wetness, a nightmare pulled from the IID of a homicidal god. Caras pressed his face into the cold grid of the ferrocrete, his hands clamped over his ears, muttering the litany of protection until his lips went numb. He wanted to close his eyes, to retreat into the dark, but he couldn't. The horror demanded to be witnessed. Alucard did not cover his ears. He did not pray. He walked forward, the heels of his boots clicking rhythmically against the stone, a metronome in the chaos. "Beautiful," the vampire murmured, his voice cutting through the demon's screaming. "You aren't biological, are you? You're a construct. A thought form made of hate and bad manners." The demon lunged. It covered the 20 meters between them in a heartbeat, the hell-forged axe swinging in a horizontal arc meant to sever Alucard's head. The air shrieked as the blade passed, leaving a trail of burning ether. Alucard didn't dodge. He simply wasn't there. His body dissolved into a swarm of bats and shadow, the axe passing harmlessly through the cloud of darkness. The demon stumbled its momentum, carrying it forward, smashing into a hab-block support pillar. Concrete exploded. Rebar screamed as it was torn like wet paper. The shadows coalesced behind the creature. Alucard reformed, the jackal raised. "Too slow," Alucard whispered, "and far too loud." Boom, boom, boom. The jackal thundered 3 shots in rapid succession. The 13 mm rounds, tipped with blessed Macedonian silver and mercury explosive charges, slammed into the demon's back. In Alucard's universe, these rounds shattered ghouls and tore through vampires. Here, against the brass hide of a warp entity, they detonated with blinding flashes of holy light. Chunks of the demon's flesh, if it could be called flesh, were blown outward, dissolving into black smoke before they hit the ground. The demon howled not in fear, but in fury. It spun its clawed hand, lashing out faster than Karis could track. This time, Alucard wasn't fast enough. Or perhaps Karis thought with a jolt of nausea he didn't want to be. The brass claws raked across Alucard's chest, shredding the red duster and tearing through the white shirt and the skin, the muscle, the rib cage. It was a ruinous wound, one that would have bisected a normal man. Blood sprayed in a wide arc, sizzling where it hit the demon's burning skin. Alucard was thrown backward, skidding across the plaza, leaving a wet, crimson smear on the ground. He hit the base of a statue of St. Drusus, cracking the stone pedestal. "Target hit," Sergeant Azrael shouted, his bolter tracking the action. "Inquisitor, the Xenos is down. Do we engage the demon?" "Hold fire." Valdez commanded, her plasma pistol glowing dangerously hot. Her bionic eye was locked on the vampire. "Watch him." Karis watched. He saw Alucard lying against the statue, his chest open to the air heart, or whatever pumped that black fluid exposed. The vampire coughed, spitting a glob of blood onto his lapel. "Interesting," Alucard wheezed. He touched the wound. His fingers came away smoking. "It burns," Alucard said, his voice filled with genuine delight. "It's not just physical. It's spicy." The wound wasn't healing instantly. The edges of the torn flesh were glowing with a sickly purple light, the warp energy fighting against the vampire's regeneration. The shadows around Alucard twitched and spasmed as if in pain. "Warp poison," Azrael muttered over the squad vox, loud enough for Karis to hear. "It stops regeneration. He should be dead." "He should be many things," Valdez replied tightly. The demon didn't wait. It charged again, smelling weakness. It leaped into the air, the axe raised high for a crushing overhead blow. "Blood," it screamed. Alucard looked up. The orange glasses were cracked, one lens missing, revealing a crimson eye that swirled like a nebula. "Shut up," Alucard said. The vampire's shadow didn't just elongate. It exploded. Darkness erupted from the ground, solid and heavy, catching the demon in midair. Tendrils of black matter wrapped around the creature's limbs, binding the axe arm, gagging the screaming mouth. The demon thrashed, its warp strength pitting against the vampire's dark matter. The shadows groaned, stretching, tearing, but holding. Alucard stood up. The wound on his chest was knitting together now, forcing the purple energy out in wisps of foul smoke. He walked toward the suspended demon, the jackal hanging loosely in his hand. He stopped directly beneath the creature, looking up into its burning yellow eyes. "You have no soul," Alucard observed, sounding almost disappointed. "I can feel it. You're empty. Just a vessel for someone else's rage." The demon struggled, muffled growls escaping the shadow gag. "Empty calories," Alucard sighed. "What a waste." He raised the jackal. He placed the muzzle directly under the demon's chin. "Go back to your master," Alucard said softly. "Tell him the No-Life King sends his regards." He pulled the trigger. The shot didn't just pierce the skull. The explosive mercury charge detonated inside the demon's head. The brass helmet, the horns, the alien brain, matter, it all vaporized in a cloud of black ichor and fire. The demon's body went limp in the shadow tendrils. Then it began to dissolve. It didn't rot. It faded, turning into ash and greasy smoke that smelled of ozone and ancient dried blood. The hacks clattered to the floor, solid and heavy, the only proof the monster had ever been there. Alucard recalled his shadows. They slurped back into his coat like obedient pets. He stood alone in the center of the plaza, bathed in the flickering light of the dying lumen strips. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the black ichor from his face. "Messy," he commented. Kara stared. The enforcer felt a wetness on his cheeks and realized he was crying. It wasn't sadness. It was the shattering of his worldview. The ecclesiarchy taught that demons were the ultimate enemy, that only faith and fire could stop them. This thing in a red coat had treated a bloodletter like an annoyance, like a stray dog that needed to be put down. Sergeant Azrael stepped forward, his combat knife still drawn. The surviving Dark Angels flanked him, their movements perfectly synchronized. "It is destroyed," Azrael said, though he sounded unsure. "No," Valdez said, stepping out from cover. She holstered her plasma pistol, though her mechanical hand remained clenched. "Not destroyed. Banished." Alucard turned to her, raising an eyebrow. "Banished. Demons are of the warp," Valdez explained, walking toward him with a fearlessness that Karis found suicidal. "They have no physical form to kill. You destroyed its anchor in this reality, casting its essence back to the immaterium. It will reform. It will return. It will remember you." Alucard paused. He looked at the spot where the demon had dissolved. A slow, creeping smile spread across his face, wider and more manic than before. "It comes back?" Alucard asked, a tremor of excitement in his voice. "Inevitably," Valdez said. "The war in the warp is eternal. The enemies of mankind are infinite. We fight a tide that never recedes." Alucard threw his head back and laughed. It was a long, rolling sound that echoed off the hive spires. It was the laughter of a man who had been starving for centuries and just found himself at a banquet. "Infinite," Alucard gasped, wiping a tear from his eye. "Eternal. Do you have any idea how boring omnipotence is, Inquisitor? Do you know what it's like to be the monster in the dark when there's nothing in the dark that can bite back?" He spread his arms, encompassing the ruined plaza, the terrified enforcer, the wary space marines, the toxic sky. "But this," Alucard breathed. "This place is perfect. Gods that want to kill me. Monsters that don't stay dead. Armies of super soldiers in colorful armor." He looked at Valdez, his crimson eyes locking onto her bionic lens. "Inquisitor, I think I'm gonna like it here." Valdez didn't blink. She held his gaze, her mind working through calculations that would break a lesser intellect. Karas could see it in her posture, the rigid control. She was terrified. She had to be. But she was burying that fear under layers of duty. "You enjoyed that," Valdez stated. "Immensely," Alucard admitted. "Then you are dangerous," she said. "A creature that revels in slaughter is a liability." "I am a weapon," Alucard corrected. "You carry a gun, Inquisitor. Does the gun care what it shoots? No. But the gun needs a hand to aim it." He took a step toward her. Azrael raised his bolter. Alucard ignored him. "You have a problem," Alucard said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I can smell it on you. Desperation. You're losing this war of yours, aren't you? Slowly, inch by bloody inch." Valdez's jaw tightened. "The Imperium endures." "Endurance isn't winning," Alucard countered. "You need something that breaks the rules. Something that doesn't care about your physics or your prayers." He gestured to himself. I offer you a trade, Inquisitor Valdez. You give me targets. The biggest, nastiest, most impossible things in your galaxy. Point me at your real monsters. And in exchange. He knelt. It was a mocking gesture, theatrical and overblown. But he lowered himself to one knee, bowing his head. I will be your dog. I will bite what you tell me to bite. I will kill what you tell me to kill. Karis couldn't breathe. The monster was surrendering. Or was he? It felt less like submission and more like a predator agreeing to wear a collar because it knew the collar meant free meals. Valdez looked down at him. She looked at the carnage of the rust jackals. She looked at the scorch marks from the demon. She looked at the dead space marine brother Ezekiel lying broken in his armor. The Inquisition does not make pacts with Xenos, Valdez said, her voice hard. Then kill me. Alucard said, looking up with a grin. Try again. Maybe use the orbit this time. See if it sticks. Valdez looked at Azrael. The sergeant gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head. We cannot kill him, the gesture said. Not here. Not now. Valdez looked back at Alucard. If you betray me, she said, her voice dropping to a lethal quiet. If you harm one innocent citizen without my direct authorization, I will find a way to unmake you. I will scour every atom of your being into the void. Do you understand? Crystal clear, Boss Alucard said, standing up and dusting off his knees. So, where's the ride? Valdez tapped her vox bead. Command. This is Valdez. Package secured. Requesting immediate extraction. Prepare containment cell Alpha 1 and alert the chirurgeons. We have a unique biological sample. A roar of engines filled the sky above. A Valkyrie assault carrier painted in the black and red of the Inquisition descended through the smog, its searchlights blinding Karis. As the ramp lowered, Alucard turned to look at Karis one last time. The Enforcer was still on the ground, clutching his lasgun like a teddy bear. You, Alucard said, pointing a gloved finger. What is your name, boy? Karis, he stammered. Enforcer Karis. Well, Karis Alucard smiled not unkindly. You survived the night. In my experience, that makes you special. Try not to die before we meet again. The vampire turned and walked up the ramp, flanked by the Dark Angels. Valdez followed, but stopped briefly beside Karis. Enforcer, she said, handing him a data slate. You saw nothing tonight. Just a gang war, gas leak, mass hallucination. If you speak of the man in red, the Ordo Hereticus will turn you into a servitor before you can finish the sentence. Understood. Yes, my lord, Karis whispered. Good. The Emperor protects. She walked away, her coat billowing in the wash of the engines. Karis watched the Valkyrie lift off its thrusters, turning into burning stars against the nightmare sky of Morgulus Tertius. He looked around the plaza. The blood, the bodies, the cracked statue, the shattered silence. He stood up, his legs shaking. He looked at his lasgun. It felt like a toy. It felt useless. The Emperor protects. He thought the mantra, feeling hollow in his chest. But who protects us from the things the Emperor can't kill? He looked up at the dark stain of the retreating ship. The monster does. Karis wiped the tears from his face, adjusted his rebreather, and turned back to the dark. He was a survivor. And in the 41st millennium, that was the only victory that mattered. The inquisitorial fortress of Morgulus Tertius was not a building. It was a mountain of black iron and misery spiked into the planet's crust. It smelled of incense ozone and the cold, sterile sweat of people waiting to die. Deep within its bowels and containment cell, Alpha 1 Alucard sat on a chair, bolted to the floor. The walls were 3 feet of reinforced plasteel backed by void shields. 17 weapon systems, including a plasma array capable of mimicking the core of a star, were trained on his chest. He was bored. The blast door hissed open. It wasn't Valdez. It was something worse. Interrogator Hexus Vane glided into the room. Gender was a memory for Hexus. Humanity was a suggestion. The interrogator stood 7 feet tall, a skeletal sculpture of brass and wire. One eye was a pale, disturbingly biological blue. The other was a telescoping red optic that clicked and whirred like a camera shutter. Servo arms sprouted from Hexus's back, tipping with surgical saws, data probes, and syringes. Subject designated Vampire Unknown, Urukuhunonom. 1. Hexus spoke the voice, a metallic grind of binary and gothic. I am Interrogator Vane. You will submit to analysis. Alucard smiled, straining against the maglocks on his wrists. Charming. Do you do children's parties? Hexus didn't blink. The servo arms descended. A laser scalpel hummed to life, hovering millimeters from Alucard's eye. Humor recorded. Irrelevant, Hexus droned. Question 1. Physiology. Scans indicate impossible biological density. Explain. I'm full, Alucard said simply. Clarify. Souls, Alucard whispered, leaning forward, as much as the restraints allowed. I don't just drink blood, little machine. I drink life. Memories, skills, fears. I swallow them whole. He grinned, his eyes flashing. I currently contain approximately 3,402,000 souls, give or take a few hundred lost in transit. Hexus froze. The servo arms stopped their twitching. The mechanical eyes zoomed in, whirring frantically. Impossible, Hexus clicked. 3 million distinct consciousnesses within a single corporeal form. The psychic pressure would result in immediate warp spawning. You should be a portal to the immaterium. And yet Alucard shrugged. Here I am. Sane. Mostly. Hypothesis. Hexus stated, the logic coils in its brain spinning. Your extra-dimensional origin renders you incompatible with our warp. You are a closed system, a vessel the demons cannot enter, because it is already full. The implications hung in the cold air. In a universe where every soul was a doorway for monsters, Alucard was a fortress. Enforcer Karas sat in a room that was identical to a cell, though they called it a waiting area. He was stripped of his armor, wearing a gray prisoner's chit. His hands shook as he held a cup of recycle water. He hadn't been released. Valdez's promise of silence wasn't a guarantee of freedom. It was a stay of execution. He had seen a demon. He had seen an Astartes die. He had seen the Red Man. Men had been servitorized for seeing less. The door opened. Kara stood up so fast he knocked his chair over. Inquisitor Valdez stood there looking more tired than a human being had the right to be. She held a data slate. Sit, Enforcer, she said. Kara sat. Am I to be processed, my lord? Processed, Valdez looked up, her bionic eye glowing. You mean lobotomized? Normally, yes. Standard protocol for exposure to a bloodletter is immediate sterilization or execution to prevent spiritual contamination. Karas closed his eyes. The Emperor protects. The Emperor protects. However, Valdez continued tapping the slate. The asset, the vampire, has made a request. Karas opened his eyes. The monster. It remembers you. It finds you amusing. Valdez looked disgusted. It asked if the boy with the flashlight survived. In my line of work, Chaos Rapport is a tactical resource. The creature is volatile, arrogant, and dangerously bored. It responds to you. She placed a heavy ornate pistol on the table. A bolt pistol. I am promoting you, Enforcer. You are no longer with the Magistratum. You are now an acolyte of the Holy Ordos. Kara stared at the gun. It was a death sentence disguised as a promotion. You want me to manage him? I want you to be his chew toy, Valdez said bluntly. I want you to remind him that humans are fragile. It seems to amuse him to protect things. So you are going to be the thing he protects. If he goes rogue, if he turns on us, you will be the first to die. But until then, you are his leash. Karis reached out and took the pistol. It was heavy. Cold. Does he have a name, Karis asked. He calls himself Alucard, Valdez said. And God Emperor, help us all, we are going to let him off the chain. The briefing room was dark, lit only by the green glow of a hololith table. Alucard stood unbound, flanked by 4 dark angels. He had refused to sit. He paced around the hologram of a massive Gothic cathedral, his coat swirling around his ankles. Kara stood in the corner, wearing black carapace armor, now the Inquisition rosette painted on his shoulder. He tried to look invisible. Alucard winked at him. This is the target, Valdez said, ignoring the wink. She pointed to the cathedral, St. Aphine's Basilica, located in the Mid-Hive Industrial District. 6 hours ago, a cult of the blind eye seized the structure. The hologram zoomed in. Red dots swarmed the interior. Approximately 4,000 hostiles, Valdez recited. Cultists, mutants, traitor guard. They are conducting a ritual to widen the rift you sensed earlier. If they succeed, they won't just summon a bloodletter. They will summon a greater demon. A greater demon, Alucard mused. Sounds big. It is an extinction event, Valdez said grimly. If a greater demon manifests on a Hive World, containment is statistically impossible. The only countermeasure is exterminatus. Exterminatus, Alucard asked. Fancy word. We bombard the planet from orbit with cyclonic torpedoes. Valdez explained, her voice devoid of emotion. We ignite the atmosphere. We burn the world to a cinder. 80 billion people die. But the demon is denied a foothold. The room went silent. Karis felt his stomach drop. 80 billion. His family. Everyone he had ever known. Gone in a flash of fire just to stop one monster. Alucard stopped pacing. He stared at Valdez, his expression unreadable. You'd kill 80 billion people. Alucard said softly. Your own people. Just to stop one enemy. To save the sector, Valdez corrected. One world is an acceptable loss to save 1,000. Alucard looked at the map, then back at Valdez. A slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't mocking this time. It was admiring. Magnificent, Alucard whispered. Excuse me, Valdez scowled. In my world, Alucard said, walking closer to her, the humans I served were soft. They cried over hundreds. They hesitated over thousands. But you... He chuckled. You people are monsters. You trade lives like currency. 80 billion dead. That's not a tragedy to you. It's a spreadsheet error. He leaned in his face inches from hers. Your species is either incredibly stupid or incredibly magnificent. I haven't decided which yet. We do what is necessary, Valdez said, not backing down. Do you accept the mission? Oh, absolutely. Alucard grinned. I can't let you have all the fun of genocide. What are the rules? Close the rift, Valdez ordered. Kill the sorcerers, eliminate the cult, And Alucard. Yes, try to save the cathedral. It's a historical site. Alucard laughed. I make no promises about the architecture. He turned to the weapons rack where a tech priest was laying out a selection of bolters, plasma guns, and power swords. Choose your loadout, Valdez said. Those handguns of yours are impressive, but they lack penetration against heavy armor. Alucard glanced at the table of high-tech weaponry. He picked up a bolt gun, weighed it, looked at the crude craftsmanship, and tossed it back with a clatter. Garbage, he sneered. I prefer my own. They won't penetrate, a dark angel growled. Alucard patted the Casal and the jackal at his hips. You'd be surprised what you can do with a little faith and a lot of explosive mercury. Besides, he looked at Karas. I'm taking the boy. Enforcer Karas is an observer, Valdez said. He is not combat rated for this level of threat. He's my lucky charm, Alucard said. He saw me fight a demon and didn't go insane. That makes him useful. He holds my coat. Karas stepped forward, his legs trembling but his jaw set. I will go, my lord. Alucard clapped Karas on the shoulder, nearly buckling the man's knees. That's the spirit. Come along, Karas. Let's go to church. The Valkyrie ride to the drop zone was a rattling cage of noise. Karas sat strapped in, clutching his bolt pistol, surrounded by the silent, towering forms of the Dark Angels. Alucard sat opposite him, unbound, cleaning his glasses with a silk handkerchief. You're shaking, Alucard noted, his voice audible, even over the engines. I'm terrified, Karas admitted. We're flying into a cult stronghold. There are 4,000 heretics down there. Only 4,000, Alucard sighed, checking the slide on the jackal. Hardly seems fair. Fair for who? For them. The pilot's voice crackled over the Vox. Approaching drop zone. St. Ephine's Basilica. Hellsing is hot. Heavy anti-air fire. Through the viewport, Karas saw the cathedral. It was a mountain of Gothic stone, rising from the industrial smog gargoyles, leering from every spire. But now it was bleeding. Purple light pulsed from the stained glass windows. Bodies hung from the buttresses, swaying in the toxic wind. Inquisitor Alucard said into his Vox speed, I see the party. The rift is open. Then close it, Valdez's voice came back. Drop in 5 seconds. The rear ramp hissed open. The wind howled into the troop bay, carrying the smell of ozone and screaming. The Dark Angels stood up, maglocking their bolters. We drop on my mark, Sergeant Azrael commanded. Jump packs active. Jump packs. Alucard stood up, walking to the edge of the ramp. The wind whipped his coat around him like a shroud. He looked down at the army of cultists swarming the cathedral square below. Boring, Alucard said. He looked back at Karas. Try to keep up human. And then, without a shoot, without armor, without a word of prayer, the no-life king stepped off the edge. He didn't fall. He dove. Karas watched him plummet, a crimson spear aimed at the heart of the Heresy. The vampire's laughter trailed behind him, a sound that made the Dark Angels pause for a fraction of a second. Throne of Terra, Azrael muttered. Go, go, go. Karas jumped. The grav chute in his armor engaged, jerking him upward, but his eyes were locked on the figure below. Alucard hit the cathedral roof. He didn't land. He impacted. A shockwave of dust and broken slate rippled outward. From the hole in the roof, shadows began to pour out. Not smoke. Liquid darkness. It flowed down the sides of the cathedral, blotting out the gargoyles, smothering the lights. Inside the cathedral, 4,000 voices had been chanting. As Alucard crashed through the ceiling and landed on the altar, the chanting stopped. Hello, Alucard's voice boomed through the nave, amplified by nothing but his own power. He stood amidst the dust-red coat, pristine guns, drawn surrounded by a stunned army of heretics. I hear you're looking for a god. Alucard grinned, his eyes opening wide, glowing like hellfire. I'm afraid he's not home, but I can send you to him. The slaughter began. The interior of St. Aphine's Basilica was a cavern of madness. The air was thick with incense smoke that smelled of burning hair. The stained glass windows depicting saints and martyrs pulsed with a sickly violet heartbeat. And in the center of the nave, Alucard was painting the floor red. Enforcer Karis now. Acolyte Karis, huddled behind a marble pew, clutching his bolt pistol with white knuckles. He fired blindly over the top, the heavy kick of the weapon bruising his wrist. A cultist in a flayed skin robe lunged at him with a serrated knife. Karis screamed and pulled the trigger. The bolt round caught the heretic in the chest, detonating the rib cage in a shower of wet gore. Karis wiped the blood from his eyes, gasping for air. Throne. Oh God, Emperor. To his left, the dark angels were a phalanx of green ceramite and roaring bolters. They moved with the unstoppable weight of glaciers, grinding the cultist horde beneath their boots. But for every heretic they killed, 3 more scrambled over the corpses, screaming praises to the dark gods. But in the center there was art. Alucard moved like a conductor in a symphony of violence. He didn't run, he flowed. The castle barked boom, and a chaos Ogren's head vanished. The jackal roared boom, and a heavy stubber team was reduced to mist. He spun his coat flaring like a matador's cape, dodging a volley of lass fire that would have cut a normal man in 2. He was laughing, a rich, deep sound that cut through the screams of the dying. 3738. Come on, put some back into it. He grabbed a cultist by the face, lifted him one-handed, and used the screaming man as a shield against a flamer burst. He tossed the charred corpse aside and fired a single shot that severed the fuel tank of the flamer wielder. The resulting explosion cleared the choir loft. Inquisitor Alucard shouted into his vox, reloading with a sleight of hand that blurred the eye. Your friends are very enthusiastic, but they lack technique. Focus. Vampire Valdez's voice crackled tense and tinny. The ritual is accelerating. The sorcerer is at the altar. Karis looked up. At the far end of the nave, atop the high altar, where the Emperor's Aquila had been defiled with 8-pointed stars, stood the sorcerer. He was a twisted figure in iridescent robes, his hands glowing with warp fire. Behind him, the rift was no longer a tear. It was a gaping mouth, 10 meters wide and growing. Through the tear, Karis saw things. Massive shapes shifting in a realm of impossible colors. Eyes the size of shields. He comes, the sorcerer shrieked, his voice sounding like tearing metal. The weaver of fates, the changer of ways, he comes. The air pressure dropped so low Karis's ears popped. Gravity seemed to tilt. The pews began to float. Warp breach imminent. Sergeant Azrael roared his power sword, carving through a mutant. Greater Demon manifestation in T-minus 60 seconds. Alucard Valdez shouted, "You have to stop the ritual. Kill the sorcerer." "Working on it," Alucard replied. He turned toward the altar, but the way was blocked. A wall of meat, hundreds of frenzied cultists possessed by minor warp spirits, surged forward. They piled onto each other, a tsunami of flesh. Alucard fired until his slides clicked empty. He pistol-whipped a mutant, kicked another's head off, but the sheer weight of numbers was burying him. Too many, Alucard muttered. His glasses were cracked again. His coat was shredded. He looked delighted. Level 1. Release. The shadows beneath Alucard's feet didn't just spread, they erupted. Karis watched in horror as the darkness rose up like a tidal wave. From the black sludge shapes emerged. Not just hounds this time. Centipedes made of eyes, giants made of teeth. The familiars of the no-life king. They crashed into the cultist wave. It wasn't a battle anymore. It was feeding time. The shadows tore the cultists apart. They didn't just kill, they consumed. Karis saw a woman, barely a girl, clutching a last pistol, screaming as a shadow hound clamped its jaws over her torso. She didn't fall. She was dragged into the shadow, dissolving into the black mass. Fuel, Alucard whispered, his voice echoing from every shadow in the room. I need fuel. He was eating them. All of them. The fanatics, the mutants, and the conscripts. The ones who had been forced to kneel. The ones who were hesitating. Alucard made no distinction. He consumed 4,000 souls in the span of a heartbeat to refill his reserves. Karis vomited. This was the monster he was supposed to leash. This was the weapon of the Imperium. Ritual complete, the sorcerer screamed in triumph. Come forth. The rift tore wide open. A massive claw wreathed in blue flame gripped the edge of reality. A face pushed through a bird-like visage of shifting crystal, and Feather's eyes burning with the madness of a billion lies. A lord of change, a greater demon of Tzeentch. The psychic scream of its arrival shattered the stained glass windows. Karis fell to the floor, blood pouring from his nose. The dark angels were forced back, their boots skidding on the stone, their bolters useless against the wave of psychic force. It's here, Azrael shouted. Fall back to extraction. Negative Valdez's voice was ice cold. Greater demon manifest. Containment failed, initiating exterminatus protocols. Karis froze. Exterminatus. Cyclonic torpedoes authorized. Valdez continued. Impact in 3 minutes. All forces evacuate immediately. If you are not on the transport in 2 minutes, you burn with the heretics. Evacuate Alucard. Art stood amidst the swirling shadows, looking up at the emerging demon. The creature was halfway through its massive wings, trying to squeeze into reality. Vampire Valdez barked. Get to the roof, the mission is scrubbed. We burn it all. Alucard looked at the demon. Then he looked at Karis, who was scrambling toward the exit with the Space Marines. Run, Karis, Alucard said softly. My Lord. Karis stopped. Run. Alucard turned his back on the exit. He walked toward the altar. Inquisitor, Alucard said into the Vox. Cancel the airstrike. Are you insane? Valdez shouted. That is a Lord of Change. You cannot fight it. It is made of magic and lies. I don't intend to fight it, Alucard said, holstering his empty guns. And I'm not letting you burn 80 billion people just because you're afraid of a little bird. You have no choice. Get out of there. I always have a choice. Alucard grinned, his face splitting open. Not a smile, his face. The jaw unhinged. The eyes widened into saucers of red abyss. I'm hungry. Alucard began to change. He didn't turn into a bat or a wolf. He turned into a hole in the world. His red coat dissolved into blood. His body dissolved into shadow. He became a vortex of crimson and black, a singularity of hunger standing before the singularity of chaos. He reached out not with hands, but with rivers of blood and grabbed the rift. He didn't grab the sorcerer. He grabbed the tear in reality itself. No, the sorcerer shrieked, watching his ritual crumble. You cannot touch the warp. You are filth. You are material. I, the Alucard thing, roared a voice of 3 million souls speaking in unison, am the bird of Hermes. The blood vortex slammed into the rift. Karis, pausing at the heavy oak doors of the cathedral, looked back. He witnessed the impossible. Alucard was drinking the warp. The purple energy of the rift was being sucked into the red vortex. The greater demon, halfway through, shrieked in confusion. It tried to pull back, but the vampire had it. The shadows wrapped around the demon's crystal neck. The blood flowed into its feathers. Alucard wasn't fighting the demon, he was absorbing it. The clash of energies was blinding. Red versus violet, soul versus warp. The cathedral shook stone pillars cracking like twigs. The screams of the consumed cultists mixed with the shriek of the demon and the roar of the vampire. "He's eating it," Azrael yelled, watching his Auspex readings redline. "By the lion, he's eating the warp rift." Vampire Valdez screamed over the Vox. "Stop! You will be corrupted. You will become a spawn. Stop." Harry Anderson, Alucard roared a nonsensical name from a dead world shouted with the joy of a lunatic. "Checkmate." With a sound like the universe snapping a bone, the rift collapsed. It didn't close naturally. It was sucked inside out. The greater demon was dragged screeching and clawing into the mass of red shadow. It was folded, compressed, and swallowed. The violet light vanished. Silence crashed into the room. The blood and shadow swirled for a moment longer, then fell to the floor with a wet splat. In the center of the ruined nave, amidst the gnawed bones of 4,000 cultists, Alucard stood. He was naked, his clothes regenerated from the shadow matter a second later. He fell to his knees, heaving. Smoke, purple and black, rose from his skin. His eyes were closed. "Status," Valdez demanded. "Report, did it manifest?" Kara stared at the figure on the altar. He raised his Vox bead to his lips, his hand trembling so hard he nearly dropped it. "Inquisitor," Karis whispered. "Target. Consumed." Alucard opened his eyes. They weren't just red anymore. In the center of the crimson pupil, there was a flicker of violet flame. A tiny trapped spark of the warp. Alucard burped. A small puff of purple smoke escaped his lips. Spicy, Alucard groaned, clutching his stomach. Very spicy. Extraction Team Valdez ordered, her voice shaking with a mixture of relief and absolute horror. "Secure the asset. Full containment protocols. If he sneezes, shoot him." Karas walked slowly toward the altar. He looked at the bones on the floor, the clean white bones of the fuel. Then he looked at Alucard, who was grinning up at him with a mouth that looked slightly too wide, teeth slightly too sharp. The vampire had saved the world. He had stopped the bomb. 80 billion people lived. But Karas looked into those violet-tinged eyes and knew with a certainty that froze his soul that they had just traded one monster for something infinitely worse. Alucard reached out a hand. "Help me up, Karas," he said. "I think I ate too much." Karas took the hand. It was burning hot. "Yes, my lord," Karas said. "The Emperor protects Karas," thought desperately. But who protects the Emperor from this? Medical Isolation Bay 4 looked less like a hospital and more like a bomb disposal unit. The air scrubbers were running at maximum capacity, trying to filter out the smell of ozone and burning souls that clung to the vampire's skin. Alucard sat on the edge of the reinforced biobed shirtless. His chest, where the greater demon's energies had been absorbed, was a roadmap of scarring. But the scars moved. They shifted like oil on water, forming sigils that hurt the eye to look at. Acolyte Karas stood on the other side of the armaglass, watching the monitors. The readouts were screaming. Heart rate 0. Brain activity impossible. Warp contamination critical, yet stable. "He's humming," Karas whispered to Hexus Vane. "Why is he humming?" "Subject is processing data." Hexus clicked its servo arms, twitching nervously. The absorption of a warp rift is theoretically fatal. Yet Subject Vampire 01 is integrating it. He is digesting a hole in reality. Inside the cell, Alucard stopped humming. He looked directly at the mirrored glass, his eyes flashing with that new, unsettling violet light. "I can hear you, Karas," Alucard said. His voice didn't come through the Vox speakers. It echoed directly inside Karras's skull, tasting like copper. And Hexus, your bedside manner is atrocious. I'm not processing. I'm enjoying the aftertaste. Sentient magic is minty. The door to the observation deck hissed open. Inquisitor Valdez entered. She looked like she hadn't slept in a decade. She threw a data slate onto the console. "Unlock the door," she ordered. Inquisitor Hexus warned. "Subject is unstable. Warp levels are..." I said unlock it. The door buzzed. Valdez walked into the containment cell. She didn't bring guards. She walked right up to the monster that had eaten a greater demon. "You're alive," she stated. Disappointed, Alucard grinned. The scars on his chest flared purple. "Surprised," she corrected, "and concerned. You consumed raw immaterium. You should be a gibbering spawn. Instead, you're stronger." "I have a cast-iron stomach," Alucard said, swinging his legs. "So what's next? You didn't come here to check my temperature." "You have that look. The someone needs to die look." Valdez activated the hololith in the center of the room. A grainy image of a warehouse district flickered to life. "Subsector 12, Valdez said. Intelligence confirms a high-value target has surfaced. A Chaos Space Marine champion, Malor the Blooded. A World Eater veteran of the Long War." A Space Marine Alucard sat up, interest peaked. Like the big green ones, but angrier. Much angrier, Valdez said. "He has slaughtered his way through 6 PDF regiments. He is gathering survivors from your cathedral incident, trying to stabilize a new foothold. He thinks he's a god of war. And you want me to prove him wrong?" "I want you to obliterate him," Valdez said. "But this is different, Alucard. Malor isn't a mindless beast or a stationary rift. He is a warrior with 10,000 years of combat experience. He is enhanced by Khorne the Blood God. He will not fall for your parlor tricks." Good Alucard stood up the shadows in the room, lengthening toward him. I was getting bored with the magic shows. I want a fist fight. The warehouse district of Morgalis Tertius was a graveyard of industry. Rusted silos towered like tombstones over maze-like alleys of corrugated iron. The rain here was black and oily, slicking the cobblestones. Alucard walked down the center of the main thoroughfare. He didn't hide. He wanted to be seen. Karras followed 10 paces behind, clutching his bolt pistol. The new leash felt very flimsy. "He's here," Alucard whispered. "Can you smell it, Karras, old blood? Rotting iron." "Rage. I smell promethium and fear," my Lord Karras stammered. No, Alucard stopped. He looked at a massive sliding door at the end of the street. "You smell the prey." Crash! The warehouse doors exploded outward. A rhino-armored transport painted blood red and covered in spikes smashed through the metal, drifting sideways to create a barricade. From behind the vehicle they came. Not cultists this time. These were soldiers. Traitor guard wearing flayed skin over their armor, their eyes gouged out and replaced with brass sockets. And leading them, he was a mountain of red ceramite. Malor the Blooded stood 8 feet tall. His helmet was crowned with the bunny ears of the World Eater's stylized wings of brass. In his hands, he held a chain axe that was revving with a sound like a tortured animal. Vampire Malor roared. His voice was a tectonic plate shifting. "The warp screams your name. The blood god has watched you eat his rival's essence." Alucard adjusted his glasses. He was watching. "I hope he liked the show." "He demands your skull," Malor charged. It wasn't a run. It was a blur of red violence. Malor covered the 50 meters in 2 seconds, the chain axe swinging for Alucard's neck. Alucard drew the jackal. Bang! The explosive round hit Malor in the chest. It didn't penetrate. The Chaos armor, blessed by the blood god, flared with a red aura, absorbing the impact. Malor didn't even slow down. "Uh-oh," Alucard smirked. The axe connected. Alucard raised his left arm to block. The chain axe sheared through the limb, effortlessly severing Alucard's arm at the elbow. The blade continued biting deep into his shoulder. Blood sprayed gallons of it. Pathetic Malor shouted, backhanding Alucard with a power fist. Alucard flew backward, smashing through a brick wall and burying himself in a pile of rusted piping. Karras screamed, raising his pistol, covering fire. He fired at the traitor guard who were advancing with disciplined cruelty. The Dark Angels positioned on the rooftops opened up with bolters, turning the street into a kill zone. But Karras only had eyes for the rubble. "My lord," Karras yelled, "get up." Malor stalked toward the debris, kicking aside a steel beam. "Is this the monster that ate a rift of fragile bag of blood?" Khorne is insulted. The rubble shifted. A hand, the remaining one, shot out, gripping a piece of pipe. Alucard pulled himself up. He was laughing. His severed arm was dissolving into shadow on the pavement. At his shoulder, the stump bubbled. Black darkness poured out, shaping itself into bone, then muscle. The arm reformed in seconds, the white glove pristine. That Alucard dusted off his lapel was rude. "You heal," Malor grunted. "Good. We can do this forever." "Forever takes too long," Alucard said. "Let's try something new." Alucard's eyes flared with that violet light again, the sentient energy he had consumed. "You like the warp?" Alucard asked. "Here, have some back." He snapped his fingers. The shadows around Malor didn't attack. They warped. The reality around the Chaos Marine bent. Gravity reversed. Malor roared as he was lifted into the air, his boots scrabbling for purchase. "Sorcery," Malor spat. "Cowardice." "Adaptation," Alucard corrected. He drew the cassol. But this time he didn't fire a bullet. He channeled the consumed energy into the gun. The barrel glowed purple. Boom! The shot wasn't lead. It was a lance of kinetic hate. It struck Malor in the faceplate. The blessing of Khorne fought the energy of Tzeentch. Red met purple. The armor cracked. Malor fell crashing to the ground. Half his helmet was gone, revealing a face that was more scar tissue than skin. Alucard was on him instantly. He didn't use weapons. He used his hands. He grabbed the exposed face of the Space Marine. "You have lived 10,000 years, Alucard whispered, leaning close. "You have killed millions. You are a repository of war." The shadows latched onto Malor's armor, prying the plates open. "I wonder," Alucard smiled, his fangs extending. "What does 10 millennia of rage taste like?" "Get off me," Witch Malor struggled, his strength phenomenal. But Alucard was heavy with the weight of 3 million souls. Alucard bit down. He tore the throat out of the Chaos Champion. He didn't stop there. The blood of a Space Marine was potent, chemically enhanced, thick with clotting agents and adrenaline. But the soul was a hurricane. Alucard drank the hurricane. Malor convulsed. He didn't die like a man. He died like a reactor shutting down. His rage, his memories of the siege of Terra, the burning of Scalathrax, the endless slaughter, it all flooded into Alucard. Karras watched as Alucard stood up, his mouth smeared with Astartes' blood. The vampire looked drunk. He staggered, catching himself on the rhino transport. The remaining traitor guards, seeing their demigod consumed, broke. They were veterans, but they were mortal. They dropped their weapons and ran toward the alleys. "They're fleeing!" Sergeant Azrael's voice barked over the Vox. "Pursuit protocols cut them down." "Let them go," Alucard said. His voice was deeper now, layered with the gravel of the Space Marine he had just eaten. "Belay that," Valdez shouted over the comms. "Kill them all. No survivors." Alucard wiped his mouth. He looked at the fleeing soldiers. Some were dragging wounded comrades. They were broken, terrified. "I said let them go," Alucard roared, and the shadows flared up, blocking the Dark Angel's line of sight. "The fight is over. They are running." "There is no sport in shooting backs." "This isn't sport," Valdez screamed. "Alucard, stand down. Allow the Astartes to engage." "No." Alucard holstered his guns. "They will spread the fear. They will tell the others what happened here. That is worth more than their corpses." He looked at Karis. "Tell them to stand down, boy." Karis looked at his Vox bead, then at the monster who had just eaten a space marine. "Sergeant Azrael, hold fire. Target secured." The traitor guard vanished into the labyrinth of the Underhive. Alucard smiled, feeling magnanimous. He felt powerful. He had killed the champion. He had shown mercy. He was the lord of this battlefield. The Valkyrie landed minutes later. Valdez stormed down the ramp. She didn't look happy. She walked right up to Alucard and slapped him. It didn't hurt him, obviously. It was like slapping a marble statue. But the audacity stunned him. "You arrogant, selfish fool," Valdez hissed. "I won," Alucard said, confused. "I ate the big one. I saved your soldiers. You let 38 heretics escape," Valdez said, trembling with rage, "just like you did at the cathedral." The cathedral, Alucard frowned. "I ate everyone at the cathedral." "You missed a group in the crypts," Valdez said. "You were too busy posing on the altar. 6 cultists escaped through the sewers while you were feeding." "So 6 people. Who cares?" Valdez pulled up her data slate and shoved it into Alucard's chest. "Read it." Alucard looked at the screen. It was a casualty report from the lower Hab blocks. Timestamp 1 hour ago. Incident: demonic incursion. Casualties: 43. Imperial Guardsmen. 112 civilians. Cause: ritual sacrifice initiated by fleeing cathedral cultists. Alucard stared at the numbers. "They found a Hab block," Valdez said, her voice hollow. "They didn't have the resources for a great ritual. So they grabbed families, children. They carved symbols into them to summon a pack of lesser demons. A patrol of guardsmen intercepted them. They contained it, but they died doing it." Valdez looked up at Alucard, her bionic eye whirring softly. 43 good men are dead, Alucard. Not because the enemy was strong, but because you wanted to feel superior. Because you wanted to be merciful. Alucard looked at Karis. The acolyte couldn't meet his eyes. "You apply the morality of your world to ours," Valdez whispered. "You think mercy is a virtue. Here, mercy is a weakness that kills. In the 41st millennium, the only kindness is a clean death." She pointed to the alley where the traitor guard had just fled. "You just let 30 more go. How many will they kill tonight? Vampire who dies because you wanted to make a point." Alucard looked at the dark alley. He could still smell them. The fear, the sweat, and the corruption. He felt the soul of Malor inside him, the space marine he had just eaten. Malor wasn't merciful. Malor knew the truth. The enemy never stops. The war never ends. Alucard felt a cold knot form in his stomach. It wasn't hunger, it was shame. He had played with his food. And innocent people, the people he claimed to protect, had paid the bill. Alucard started, his voice quiet. "Get on the ship," Valdez said, turning her back on him. "We have one last target. And God Emperor, help you, Alucard. If you hesitate again, I will put a bolter round through Karis's head myself, just to teach you a lesson." Alucard froze. He looked at Karis. The boy was pale, clutching his pistol, looking at Valdez with terror. "You wouldn't," Alucard growled, his eyes narrowing. "Try me," Valdez said. "This is not a game. Welcome to the Inquisition." Alucard clenched his fists. The shadows around him boiled, reflecting his turmoil. He looked at the alleyway one last time. He raised the jackal. He aimed at the darkness where the soldiers had fled. He hesitated. Then he lowered the gun. It was too late. They were gone. Lesson learned, Alucard whispered to himself. The violet light in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a deep, bloody crimson. He walked up the ramp. He didn't look back. The no-life king had just lost his innocence. Again. The Prometheum processing complex on the southern continent was a monument to the Imperium's decay. It was a sprawling city of pipes and smokestacks that covered 50 square kilometers, silent for a century, now reawakened by the heartbeat of something that hated silence. The air here didn't just smell toxic. It tasted of copper and ozone. The sky was a bruised purple, the clouds swirling in unnatural patterns that mirrored the sigils painted on the rust-flaked walls below. Alucard walked through the main gate. He didn't phase through it. He didn't jump over it. He kicked the 10-ton plasteel doors off their hinges. Karis followed, his boots crunching on the glass and bone littering the entryway. The acolyte was pale, his hands gripping the bolt pistol Valdez had given him. He looked at the back of Alucard's coat, ragged now, stained with the blood of 1,000 heretics, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. My Lord Karis whispered into the comms. The scanner, it's maxed out. The energy reading is off the scale. I know, Alucard said without turning around. His voice was low, stripped of the playful lilt it had carried before. He's waiting. Oh, who? The big one. The one Valdez is terrified of. Alucard adjusted his glasses, now cracked and held together by sheer will. Thraskul, the Ascended. Inquisitor Valdez Karis keyed his vox. We are inside. No resistance yet. It's a trap, Acolyte Valdez's voice came back, distorted by the interference of the psychic aura. Thraskul is a demon prince. He doesn't need patrols. He wants you to come to him. He wants to make a point. He wants my skull, Alucard corrected. He's going to find it's firmly attached. They moved deeper. The complex was a labyrinth of shadows, but the shadows were wrong. They moved when Alucard didn't. They whispered in languages Karis prayed he would never understand. Finally, they reached the central processing chamber. It was a cathedral of industry, a vast, hollow space where cooling towers stretched up into the dark, like the pillars of a titan's temple. In the center, suspended above a pit of bubbling, corrupted promethium, was a throne. It was made of fused weapons, bolters, chains, wards, laser guns, melted together into a seat of jagged metal. And sitting on it was the end of the world. Thraskul the Ascended was 15 feet of nightmare meat. He looked like a space marine that had been turned inside out and inflated with hate. His skin was red iron. His muscles were hydraulic cables. Wings of shadow and brass sprouted from his back, spanning 30 feet. He held an axe that was larger than Karis. The blade wept liquid fire. Around the throne stood 12 figures. Chaos Space Marines, World Eaters, the Elite Guard. They stood motionless like gargoyles of ceramite and bone. Alucard stopped in the center of the walkway. Karis stopped 10 paces behind, trying to make himself small. Thraskul opened his eyes. They were pits of yellow fusion fire. Vampire the Demon Prince rumbled. The sound vibrated the catwalk, shaking dust from the ceiling. You smell of my brother. Malor Alucard asked, his hands resting on his guns. He was chewy, a bit tough. He was weak. Thraskul sneered, standing up. The sound of his armor shifting was like a car crash. He clung to his armor. He clung to his anger. I have transcended both. The demon prince stepped off the throne. He didn't fall. He walked on the air, descending slowly, carried by the sheer force of his warp presence. "Khorne watches you," Thrazgul said, landing on the walkway with a heavy thud that buckled the metal plates. "He saw you eat the rift. He saw you eat the champion. He is amused. He wonders if you will pop when I squeeze you." "I don't pop easily," Alucard said. "We shall see." Thrazgul gestured with a clawed hand. "Kill the spare. Bring me the monster." The 12 World Eaters moved. It wasn't a charge. It was an execution protocol. They raised their bolters, ancient Heresy-era weapons that fired rounds the size of soda cans and unleashed a wall of fire at Karis. Karis screamed, diving behind a rusted generator. The metal sparked and disintegrated as explosive rounds hammered it. He was pinned. He was dead. Alucard didn't look at Karis. He looked at the World Eaters. "Lesson learned," Alucard whispered. He drew. It wasn't the flourish of the plaza or the dance of the cathedral. It was efficiency. Cold, brutal, mechanical efficiency. The castle barked. A World Eater's knee exploded. As the giant stumbled, the jackal roared, taking the head off. Alucard moved forward, walking through the bolter fire. Rounds struck him, tearing chunks out of his coat and body, but he didn't slow down. He didn't banter. He didn't count. He shot a Marine in the throat, stepped in, and kicked the body into the path of another, using the corpse to block a chain axe swing. He jammed the jackal's barrel into the eye lens of the attacker and pulled the trigger. Click, boom! The back of the helmet blew out. "Protect the prince," a World Eater shouted. "You can't even protect yourselves," Alucard growled. He dropped his empty guns. He didn't reload. He released the shadows. Restriction level 1. The darkness surged, but it was different now. It was tinged with the violet light of the consumed rift and the red rage of Malor. The familiars that emerged weren't just dogs. They were armored. They had brass teeth. They had burning eyes. The shadows swarmed the remaining Marines. A hellhound made of smoke and Astartes souls tore the arm off a World Eater. A centipede of eyes wrapped around another, crushing his power armor like a tin can. In 30 seconds, the 12 champions were dead. Silence returned to the chamber, broken only by the dripping of blood and the hum of Thrazgul's axe. Alucard stood amidst the carnage, his hands dripping black ichor. He looked up at the demon prince. "Your turn," Alucard said. Thrazgul laughed. "Impressive. You fight like a beast, but you are still mortal meat." The demon prince charged. It was faster than anything that size had the right to be. The axe, a weapon named World Drinker, swung in a blurred arc. Alucard tried to phase. He turned to mist, but the axe was wreathed in warp fire. It burned the mist. It cut the shadow. Schlick. The blade caught Alucard mid-phase. It cleaved him from shoulder to hip. It wasn't just a cut. It was an unmaking. The warp energy cauterized the wound, instantly preventing the flesh from knitting. Alucard was thrown across the chamber, smashing into a cooling tower. The metal crumpled. Karis peeked out from his cover. "My lord." Alucard fell to the grate, his body split open. He tried to stand, but his legs didn't work. The wound glowed with a sickly red light. You see, Thrazgul walked closer, his hooves clanking on the metal. "You play with shadows. I am the shadow. You drink blood. I drink worlds." He reached down and grabbed Alucard by the head. He lifted the vampire up, dangling him over the pit of molten waste. 3 million souls. Thrazgul sniffed, tasting the air. "I can hear them screaming. They are burning vampire. My axe kills the soul, not just the body." Alucard hung there, his legs dangling uselessly. He grabbed Thrazgul's wrist with his bloodied hands. "You talk Too much, Alucard wheezed. And you die too slowly. Thraskul squeezed. Alucard's skull began to crack. Khorne cares not from where the blood flows, only that it flows. Alucard's eyes, hidden behind the cracked glasses, opened wide. The violet flame he had stolen from Tzeentch flared, mixing with his own crimson power. Karis Alucard's voice echoed in the acolyte's head. "Look away." What Karis whispered. "Look away." Karis ducked back behind the generator, covering his eyes. Restriction level 0. Alucard roared, his voice a legion. Release. The world went black. It wasn't just darkness. It was a physical weight. The shadows didn't just come from Alucard. They came from everywhere. From the corners of the room, from the cracks in the floor, from the inside of Karis's own eyelids. Thraskul roared in confusion as the vampire in his grip dissolved. Alucard became a liquid ocean of blood and darkness. The ocean swallowed the demon prince. Thraskul swung his axe, wildly cutting rifts in the darkness. But you cannot kill a tidal wave with a sword. The blood rose up, forming a giant gnashing maw, the jaws of the Baskerville magnified to the size of a titan. What is this sorcery? Thraskul bellowed his wings, beating futilely against the crushing weight of the blood sea. It's not sorcery, Alucard's voice came from everywhere. It is hunger. The jaws clamped shut around the demon prince. The struggle was titanic. The factory shook. Pipes burst, spraying steam. The catwalks twisted. Thraskul burned with the fury of a sun trying to boil the blood away. But Alucard held on. He was channeling every soul he had, the 3 million from Earth, the 4,000 vows from the cathedral, the essence of Malor, the energy of the rift. He used them as a cage. Inside the singularity of the consumption, Alucard met Thraskul soul to soul. It was a landscape of fire. Thraskul stood there, a giant of brass. Alucard stood opposite him, a man in a red coat. "You cannot eat me," Thraskul screamed. "I am eternal. I am a constant of the universe." "You are lunch," Alucard said. And then the sky of that inner world tore open. A giant red eye looked down. Khorne, the blood god, was watching. He saw his prince trapped in the gullet of an alien parasite. The pressure was immense. Alucard felt his own existence fracturing. The gaze of the god was heavier than a black hole. Khorne could have crushed Alucard then. He could have reached down and popped the vampire like a grape. But Khorne is the god of war. He is the god of strength. And he despises weakness. Thraskul was losing. Thraskul was weak. The giant eye narrowed. A sound echoed through the psychic plane, a deep, rumbling harumph. Khorne turned away. He abandoned his prince. Thraskul screamed in betrayal. "My lord, no." Alucard smiled. He doesn't like losers, Thraskul. Neither do I. Alucard opened his mouth, unhinging his jaw until it was wider than his body, and swallowed. In the physical world, the ocean of blood collapsed inward. It swirled down a drain that didn't exist, compressing into a single point in the center of the walkway. The screaming stopped. The heat dissipated. Alucard lay on the metal grating. He was whole. His legs were attached. His coat was pristine. But he was changing. His skin rippled, turning metallic for a second before softening back to flesh. Horns, small nub-like protrusions, pushed through his hair, then retracted. He gasped, clawing at his chest. "Karis," he croaked. Karis scrambled out from behind the generator. He ran to the vampire's side. "My lord, did you—" "Is it dead?" Alucard looked up. His eyes were terrible. The left eye was his own crimson. The right eye was yellow with a slit pupil. A demon's eye. "It's not dead, Alucard," whispered, clutching his stomach. "It's inside." He retched, spitting up a glob of molten brass that sizzled on the deck. He's angry, Alucard groaned. He's very, very angry. Inquisitor Karras yelled into the Vox. Target neutralized, but the asset is compromised. He's mutating. Hold position, Valdez's voice was clipped. Do not approach him. I'm already next to him. Then pray, Acolyte. Because if he loses control, you are the first sacrifice. Alucard rolled onto his back, staring at the polluted ceiling. He could feel Thrasgul inside him, a storm of rage trapped in a bottle of souls. The demon prince was thrashing, trying to claw his way out of Alucard's mind. Let me out, parasite. Thrasgul's voice roared in his head. I will flay you from the inside. Quiet down, Alucard thought back, clamping down with the weight of 3 million human lives. You're a tenant now. Pay rent or shut up. It took effort. Immense crushing effort. Alucard's hands were shaking. Smoke curled from his ears. He looked at Karras. The boy was holding the bolt pistol, aiming it at Alucard's head. His hands were shaking, tears streaming down his face. Don't make me do it, my Lord Karras wept. Please don't make me do it. Alucard looked at the gun, a bolt pistol, against a being that had just eaten a demigod. It was adorable. It was pointless, but it was brave. Alucard smiled. It was a strained, painful smile, but it was real. Put it down, Karras, Alucard rasped. I'm full. I couldn't eat another bite. He sat up, fighting the urge to tear Karras's head off, an urge that came from Thrasgul, not him. He pushed it down. He locked it away in the deepest dungeon of his mind, right next to the memories of his own death. Inquisitor Alucard said into the Vox, his voice sounding like two people speaking at once. Dinner is served. Is he contained? Valdez asked. He is, Alucard said, standing up. He felt heavier, stronger. He felt the knowledge of 10,000 years of war settling into his brain. He knew how to use a bolter. He knew the weak points of a titan. He knew the secret names of Khorne. I have him, Alucard said. An Inquisitor, he says hello. The extraction was tense. The Space Marines that met them at the landing zone didn't lower their weapons. They sensed the evil radiating off Alucard. He smelled like brimstone and dry blood. He walked past them, ignoring the bolters aimed at his head. He walked straight to Valdez. She looked at him. She looked at the yellow eye. She didn't flinch. You did it, she said. I did, Alucard nodded. Now, about that challenge you promised me. Challenge? I just ate a Prince. Alucard grinned, the yellow eye flashing. And I'm still hungry. What else have you got? Valdez looked at the data slate in her hand. She looked at the map of the galaxy, at the Great Rift, at the Tyranid Hive fleets, at the Necron dynasties. She looked at the monster she had unleashed. Everything, Valdez said. We have everything. Alucard laughed. It was a sound that made the Space Marine step back. It was the sound of a nightmare realizing it had found paradise. Good, Alucard said, because I'm just getting started. The recovery room was silent, save for the rhythmic hiss-click of the air cyclers. It was the silence of a bomb that had stopped ticking with 1 second left on the clock. Alucard sat in a high-backed chair, dressed in a fresh suit. The duster was new, synthesized by the Fortress Manufactorum, a deep crimson weave of ballistic fiber. He held a teacup in one gloved hand. The china was delicate, painted with blue flowers. Inside the cup was not tea. It was warm, viscous, and red. You're staring, Karras, Alucard said, taking a sip. Acolyte Karras stood by the door. He wasn't wearing his enforcer armor anymore. He wore the long gray robes of an inquisitorial retainer, the rosette pinned over his heart. He looked older. The past 3 days had carved 10 years into his face. Your eye, my lord, Karras whispered. Alucard lowered the cup. He looked at his reflection in the darkened window. His left eye was his own, the deep, pooling crimson of the vampire. His right eye was Thrasgul's, a vertical slit of burning yellow magma. "It's a souvenir." Alucard smiled. The yellow eye dilated independently of the red one. "A reminder that I'm never eating spicy food before bed again." The door opened. Inquisitor Valdez entered. She didn't have her usual entourage of stormtroopers. She was alone. That was the highest compliment she could pay. "The Grey Knights have stood down," Valdez announced, stopping at the foot of the Alucard's chair. "Inquisitor Lord Kiros has reviewed the footage from the processing plant. He has reconsidered his transfer request." "He realized he couldn't hold me?" Alucard asked. "He realized that if we tried to extract the demon prince from you, we would likely level the sector," Valdez corrected dryly. "You are now classified as a sanctioned Xenos asset. Designation Omega Red." Catchy, Alucard mused. "Does it come with a dental plan?" Valdez walked to the viewport. The blast shutters retracted, revealing the void of space. Morgalis Tertius hung below them, a festering wound of a planet wrapped in smog and orbital defense platforms. Beyond it, the stars stretched out 1 billion points of light, and Alucard knew that around every single one of them, something was screaming. "Look at it," Valdez said softly. Alucard stood and walked to the window. He felt the weight of the souls inside him. Thrasgul was quiet, sulking in a cage of psychic iron. Malor was a simmering pit of tactical rage. The cathedral cultists were a chorus of whispers. He wasn't alone. He would never be alone again. "It's big," Alucard noted. "It is infinite," Valdez said. She tapped a console and a holographic map projected over the glass. It showed the galaxy. The great rift tore through the center like a jagged scar. The red zones of the Tyranid fleets, the green tides of the Orcs, the black dead zones of the Necrons. "We are fighting a war on 1,000,000 fronts," Valdez said, her voice heavy with the exhaustion of her species. "Every day, 100 worlds burn. Every day, 1 billion human lives are snuffed out. We are fighting against the dying of the light vampire, and the light is losing." She turned to him, her bionic eye whirring. "You said you wanted a challenge. You said you were bored with omnipotence." She swept her hand across the star map. "Here is your challenge. Here is infinity. There are more monsters in this galaxy than you could kill in 100,000 years." Alucard looked at the map. In his old universe, he had been the apex predator in a small pond. He had hunted Nazis and ghouls in London streets. Here there were gods who could crush stars. Here there were swarms that devoured galaxies. He felt a tremor in his hands. Not fear, anticipation. "And you want me to fight them all?" Alucard asked. "I want you to be the nightmare that the nightmares fear," Valdez said. "I want you to go into the dark where my soldiers cannot go. I want you to eat the things that want to eat us." Alucard looked at Karis. The boy was watching him, terrified, hopeful, desperate. Karis was the humanity Alucard had once served. Fragile, stupid, magnificent. Alucard thought of Integra. She would have hated this place. She would have hated the cruelty, the fanaticism, the crushing weight of the theocracy. But she would have understood the necessity. "Search and destroy," she would have said. "Search and destroy." "I accept," Alucard said. He finished his cup of blood and set it down on the console with a delicate clink. "But we keep the leash," Alucard added, nodding at Karis. "The boy stays. He reminds me which side of the glass I'm on." "Agreed," Valdez said. "And one more thing," Alucard said, his yellow eye flaring. Point me at the biggest thing on that map." Valdez smiled. It was a grim, wolfish expression. She tapped a sector on the eastern fringe. "There is a hive fleet approaching the Macrage sector. Billions of bioforms. The Great Devourer." Bugs Alucard chuckled, his shadows stretching out to fill the room, forming the shapes of the Baskerville the Dandy Man, and new twisted forms made of brass and rage. I hate bugs. He turned to the door, his coat billowing around him. "Come along," Karas Alucard commanded. "We have work to do." "Yes, my lord," Karas said, his voice steady for the first time. As they reached the door, Alucard paused. He looked back at the planet below, at the endless hives where life was cheap and death was the only currency. "Inquisitor," Alucard said. "Yes, this emperor of yours." Alucard adjusted his glasses. "He protects, does he?" Valdez straightened her hand, resting on her rosette. "The emperor protects." Alucard grinned, and in the reflection of the glass, 1,000 monsters grinned with him. "And so," Alucard whispered, "do I." He stepped into the corridor into the dark, ready to greet the 41st millennium with open jaws.